What's up, Planeswalkers? It's your boy K-Dog. Another fun video for you guys. This one we are back in Historic with a aggressive Boros list. And the kind of build around for this one was this 2-mana enchantment for red and white. Get a legendary enchantment, Path of Mettle. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each creature that doesn't have First Strike, Double Strike, Vigilance, or Haste. And whenever you attack with at least 2 creatures that have those abilities, you transform Path of Mettle. When you transform Path of Mettle, it is a legendary land, so you can only have one of these out at a time. You can tap it for 1 mana of any color, or you can pay 1 in a red, tap it, and deal 2 damage to each opponent, or you can play 2 in a white and tap it to destroy a creature at random that attacked this turn. So it's kind of a nice way to get around like hexproof and things like that. It's kind of a little mini settle the wreckage, if you will, something like that, or maybe like a seal away, that kind of thing. So this works really well because there are so many good aggressive creatures that have these abilities in Boros colors, and then you just attack into them, especially with a hasty creature. Even if maybe you lose something in combat, just to flip your Path of Mettle, that's usually worth it most of the time. And then from there, especially if you're against like a control deck, they wipe your board. As long as you have your Path of Mettle flip, you can just keep pinging them for 2 damage turn after turn. If they have some big creature, back when, standard, obviously Carnage Tyrant was kind of the big threat this would take down. But now, you have things like Dream Trawler you have to worry about as well. And this will just, there's no getting around hexproof. It just chooses a creature at random that attacked this turn. So there's no saving their Dream Trawler or things like that. So it's kind of built-in protection for like board wipes and removal and things like that. So the way we're going to get there is we have 4 Fanatical Firebrand, just a nice 1/1 for haste. 1/1 for 1 with haste, and then you can tap it to sacrifice it, deal 1 damage to any target. So this is kind of a trade-off with other creatures. You can we do have some first strike creatures, so we can kind of hold our Firebrand back up, attack in with our first striker, and if they want to block, we can ping something for 1, and then our first striker can kind of finish it with first strike damage and survive combat. So that's kind of a trick that can be used sometimes. Obviously, if you've pinged them down with, incremental damage here and there, and you can kind of get them down with Path of Mettle, things like that, and Firebrand can kind of help you finish them off as well. So, of course, all 4 Fervent Champions, just one of the best 1-drops you can be playing, a 1/1 for 1, first strike, and haste. And whenever it attacks another target attacking knight you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. We do have a couple Embercleaves, so the equip abilities part of this will be relevant, so it makes it 3 less to activate the equip abilities. So that will come to sometimes be relevant. We do have a decent number of knights in this list, so this obviously synergizes with itself, but also some of our other knights that you'll see as well. And of course, we're trying to be aggressive and just close out the game as quickly as possible. So all 4 shocks, so we can deal 2 damage to any target, just like the first strike and combat ability. We can shock something, and the first strike can finish it off before the creature would die. So it's a pretty cool little trick, and then just kind of reaching for damage to finish off our opponent's face, or planeswalkers, things like that. And we do have all 4 Knight of Grace. It's a 2/2 first striker, so it's a knight, so it synergizes with some of the other knights that we have. It does have hexproof from black, so that'll be nice in certain matchups. And it gets +1/+0 as long as any player controls a black permanent. We're in Boros color, so it'll be up to our opponent to represent those black permanents. But if they do, then this becomes a 3/2 first striker with hexproof from black. So they can still obviously block with their creatures, but they can't target it with their removal. So that's a pretty nice benefit. And having first strike just means it's very difficult for our opponent to deal with it in any matchup. We're also running 4 Sunhome Stalwarts. It's a 2/2 first strike with Mentor. So this works really well with obviously the Firebrand or the Fervent Champion, things like that. It kind of buffs them up. Mentor means that if a creature has less power, then you can give that creature a +1/+1 counter on it. So that works really well with our 1-drops. I'm also running a couple Direfleet Daredevils. It's pretty, situational, not something you usually want to play on turn 2. But sometimes, you just want to get a creature down, and that's just what you have in your hand. So Direfleet Daredevil just has a 2 of, but most likely you want to draw into this kind of in the mid to late game, and because it has this neat little enter the battlefield trigger. It's a 2/1, but it does have first strike. And what makes it so good is that when it enters the battlefield, we exile an instant or sorcery card from the opponent's graveyard, and we can cast that card this turn and spend mana of any type to cast that. And regardless of whether we do cast it, we still exile that card, so that can be certainly relevant in certain situations where your opponent has like a jumpstart card or escape, some kind of a escape spell or something you might want to just get rid of. Or, you know, if you're against control decks, sometimes you can drop this down on like turn 4 and then get their Thought Erasure and use that against them. That's kind of a sweet little trick, and get that sweeper, you know, Ritual of Soot or Kaya's Wrath or whatever out of their hand. So that works really well in certain situations. Or even against like burn decks, you know, and get the shock out of the graveyard and just use it against them or their creatures. And just for some efficient removal that kind of goes against small or big creatures, a couple Justice Strikes. For red and white, we can instant speed, deal have target creature deal damage equal to itself to its power. So obviously if the ratio of power to toughness isn't right, this doesn't always work, but as long as the power is greater than the toughness, we can kill most creatures. And so just the 3 Path of Mettle. Since it is legendary, we don't really want to have this in multiples. You know, we want to be able to kind of empty our hand as quickly as possible, and if we're stuck with multiples of these, it doesn't usually work very well. So that's why just the 3 for me, even though it's a pretty key card. So sometimes just having it's kind of a one-sided board wipe, especially when you think about like the mono-white life gain decks and how they have all those 1/1s and things like that. So that works really well against that matchup. And we also run in a couple of Relentless Raptors. This is kind of an interesting card because it's a 3/3 for 2 mana with a Vigilance. So that sounds pretty good, but it has to attack or block each combat if able. That's why it's a little bit awkward in just the 2 of. So having the stats is really nice. But you know, sometimes you don't always want to be attacking in with this because your opponent has bigger creatures and it's just going to die and not going to trade into anything. But we are an aggressive deck, and this is, you know, the nice stats, so we're just going to run just a 2 of. And some more of the Night synergy. We have 3 History of Benalia. If any of you guys remember the Dominaria standard, this was just a powerhouse in so many different types of decks. For 2 white and 1, you get a Saga, where the first 2 phases you get a couple of 2/2. Well, each Saga you get a 2/2 white knight creature token with Vigilance. So over the course of 2 turns, you'll have 2 of these guys. And then the third Saga, knights you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. So obviously we have the the 2/2 tokens that this produces, and we also have our Knight of Grace and our Fervent Champion. So we do have a bit of a knight sub theme going on that we're not really too heavily on, but this is just such a good card, and it works really well with what we're doing. So as you can see, all of our creatures, even the creature tokens, you know, have First Strike, they have Vigilance, and/or they have Haste. So including a couple copies of Taranika. It's a 3/3 with Vigilance. Also, it is legendary, so that's why just a 2 of. So some situations it's amazing, especially against like other aggro type decks. But sometimes it's just pretty mediocre, or if you do have an empty board, you know, it doesn't really do necessarily a whole lot. But when it does work, it works really, really well. So Taranika is a legendary human soldier with Vigilance, 3/3, and whenever it attacks, we get to untap another creature we control, and until end of turn, that creature has base power and toughness 4/4 and indestructible. So that works really, really well with pumping up our smaller creatures. You know, we can use this on like our Firebrand or Fervent Champion and make it a 4/4, you know, like First Strike or something like that. And so yeah, this makes things really difficult for our opponent to deal with. And a couple Phoenix of Ash. It's a 2/2 flying haster for 3, so it's decent stats. It does have the activated ability. We can put 3 mana into it to give it +2/+0 until end of turn. So if your opponent doesn't have any way to deal with flyers, this is a nice aggressive threat. And also it's pretty resilient because it has the escape mechanic. And it's the only card in here in this list that has escape. So, you know, for opponents very control heavy, lots of board wipes, the Phoenix can at least keep threatening to come back. You can just exile the other creatures that you lost to those Kaya's Wrath and Shadow of the Skies and things like that, and just kind of keep bringing the Phoenix of Ash back so you can keep presenting threats your opponent has to answer. And we're running just the 1 of Tajic. It is legendary, and sometimes it's like super fantastic, and sometimes it doesn't really do a whole lot. So I used to, earlier versions of this, especially in previous historics and standards, I had multiple copies, but I think just 1 is probably where you want to be. It is a 3/2 with haste. It does have Mentor, so pretty much all of our other creatures, it can put a +1 counter on them. And you prevent all non-combat damage that would be out to other creatures you control. So if like your opponent is trying to clear you with like a Deafening Clarion or a Storm's Wrath, the rest of your creatures will survive, but Tajic will die. So it's kind of a pseudo board wipe protection, and it doesn't work unfortunately with like Kaya's Wrath or Shadow of the Sky, Cleansing Nova, things like that. It's just combat damage, or excuse me, non-combat damage. And since Storm's Wrath deals damage and Deafening Clarion deal damage, it would prevent that damage. And it specifically states other creatures you control, so not Tajic himself. So it does offer a little bit of protection in certain matchups in that regard. And then if you are casting this later on when you have mana open, you can pay red and white to give it first strike until end of turn. So you can start attacking in with it, give it first strike with its 3 power, and make it hard for your opponent to kind of deal with it. And just a 2 of Embercleave. Most of our creatures are kind of 2 and 3 power, so it's not really great, but certainly is worthwhile in certain situations. And we are just trying to be aggressive, and this kind of help push through the extra little bit of damage we need to close out the game. And so the mana base, we do have 21 lands. Remember, the Path of Mettle kind of counts as a land as well. We don't want to go too high, even though we do have like some 3 jobs that we really need to get to. But we can kind of survive on 2 lands for the most part. So that's why I think just 21 is where you want to be. So 6 basic plains, 6 mountain, all 4 Clifftop Retreats, all 4 Sacred Foundry. And we do have a lot of double white, double red spells. So just the 1 of Fabled Passage for just a little bit of fixing. Hopefully, we've had our multiple lands out and we can Fabled Passage and get a land to come down untapped, and we can try to keep just being aggressive as possible. And going over the sideboard real quick, I do have a couple of Gideon's Triumph as a target opponent sacrifices a creature that attacked or blocked this turn, so it's kind of a way to get around hexproof. And also if we have a Gideon Planeswalker out, that player sacrifices 2 of those creatures instead. And we are running Gideon as well because it's super fantastic in the right matchups. We are running 3 of Banishing Light, when our shocks and Justice Strikes aren't enough. We can just bring in Banishing Light, and then we can kind of deal with the Planeswalkers or enchantments or bigger creatures that we can't otherwise deal with. So just a 2 of Gideon Blackblade. It's a 3 mana 4 loyalty Planeswalker that's a 4/4 human soldier creature with indestructible, and you prevent all damage that we dealt to it during your turn. You can +1 to give one of the other creatures Vigilance, Lifelink, or Indestructible in the end of turn, and if it sticks around a little bit, you can -6 to exile any target non-land permanent. So this is just a powerhouse against like board wipes and things like that. They Kaya's Wrath your board. Even at instant speed, it doesn't matter. Gideon has Indestructible, and on their turn, when they play in a sorcery speed on their turn, it's just a Planeswalker. It's not a creature anymore, and so it doesn't die to board wipe. So it's really, really well in those situations. And then Unbreakable Formation as a 2 of creatures you control gain Indestructible end of turn for 2 in white at instant speed. Or if you cast it during your main phase, you put a +1 counter on each of your creatures, and they gain Vigilance until end of turn. So sometimes this is good against like board wipe protection, but 3 mana it can be kind of tricky to have mana open to protect your creatures in the right situations. So a lot of times this probably works better in like other sort of aggressive matchups. And this can be kind of a way to give your creatures Indestructible, counters, and Vigilance. So you can kind of tack in worry-free. Your creatures are vigilant, so they don't tap, so you can hold them back for blocks next turn. It doesn't matter how your opponent blocks, your creatures don't die because they have Indestructible, and then you buff them up by putting counters on them. So usually that's the best way to use Unbreakable Formation. And also against the kind of control-heavy matchups, we got 3 of Legion Warboss. So obviously the Goblin tokens don't really work too well with Path of Mettle, so sometimes you will lose those. But overall, it is worth it because once you get that Path of Mettle down, and you can kind of flip it, because the 1/1 token does have haste, so that will count towards flipping your Path of Mettle. And then just a 2/2 Mentor as well will buff those Goblin tokens up, or even some of the other 1/1s. Because Legion Warboss, is a 2/2 for 3 with Mentor, and beginning of combat on your turn, you get a 1/1 red Goblin creature token with haste that attacks, that must attack that turn, basically. And then we also have a 3 of Rampaging Ferocidon for those life gain decks. 2 in red for a 3/3 Menace Dinosaur. Says players can't gain life. We don't have any life gain in our deck, so it's not really going to affect us too much. We just want to make sure we shut down our opponent with their mono white or Orzhov life gain shenanigans they're trying to do to us. And just try to shut them down so they don't get a gain life, put counters on their Johnny's Pride Mate, and that sort of thing. And it does have the also where another creature enters the battlefield, Rampaging Ferocidon, deals 1 damage to that creature's controller. So this will ping us, but we are the super aggressive Boros deck, and so we're trying to close out the game as quickly as possible, putting creatures down, maybe getting Embercleave, flipping our Path of Mettle, things like that. So we don't necessarily care about taking, little bits of damage here and there. We just want to get our creatures down, be aggressive, and just win the game. So obviously we don't want to main deck it because we don't want to punish ourselves for playing creatures. But against those life gain decks, it's super relevant, and it works much better than like a Tibalt or something like that. Alright, So we're going to jump into some best of 3. This is, I think, a reasonably competitive deck, and certainly something I'm happy to take into ranked play at any given time. Does have a lot of resiliency with like the History of Benalia works super well against board wipes. The Legion Warboss post sideboard. And then of course if you can get your Path of Mettle flipped and then just chip away for 2 damage every turn works really, really well. Alright, here we are against Dreader 0101. Okay, and of course our first wow. First couple of hands have no lands. Okay. Well, I think we have to keep. Embercleave doesn't really do a whole lot for us. We can probably ditch a second mountain. So not off to the best start, but we'll see what our opponent's up to. Might have a little bit of time here to find something. The History of Benalia certainly works super, super well. So if they play down threat, we can Justice Strike it. Result. It's not really what I want to kill. So mulligan twice, but we had no lands, and of course now the Shuffler algorithm just thinks it's funny that we draw nothing but lands, so yeah. This could be a quick game. So our opponent on Orzhov Vampires. I think we just hold up here. Should play against this person earlier, so if they drop like a Legion Lieutenant or something like that, we can just Justice Strike it. Alenda. We can Firebrand it, or we can just Justice Strike it. So just try to hold up Firebrand as long as possible. So do get a 1/1 out of it, which is much better than it could have been. I think we're priced into attacking with our 4/3s. We do have Vigilance, so if they just want to chump block, we're still okay with having a couple 2/2s back. They can obviously, you know, triple block and kill one of them maybe. Just taking the chump. I'll try to keep their board somewhat clear. So we got off to a pretty terrible start, but our opponent isn't too much of a threat yet for Exenuina, so they're going to get a ton of card advantage. We do have Embercleave. I think we just go all in here. See how they block. Definitely want to go to this Knight of Ebon Legion if we can. Especially while they're tapped out and can't do anything about it. We want to try to keep our creatures alive, so I'm fine with just Embercleaving the Firebrand here. There we get a ton of card advantage going, but they are taking damage, so that kind of works out in our favor. Especially since we are at 20 life, they haven't really been able to do a whole lot here. So it does cost 3 to equip, but they do have mana open to protect their knight and to trade off with something. Also could have removal, so I think we'll just hold up here. We could have like a Mortify or what, a Cast Down or something like that. We do want to be aggressive, but you know our opponent isn't really putting us under any pressure just yet. So I think we're okay with kind of holding out for a turn or two to try to set up better attacks. Okay, we got a couple of Legion Lieutenants down, that's fine. Still no attacks. land. Alright, so Taranika has 4/4 now, double strike and trample. And our knight also has 4/4, indestructible. So it's a pretty favorable situation for us. Or these Legion Lieutenants and a Knight of Ebon Legion is pretty dangerous. Put them down to 3, so if we can draw a shock, and the Firebrand can kill them. Actually, yeah, they're taking damage from Phyrexian Arena. So unless they have some life gain here, then they're just about dead. Okay, Paladin of Atonement can gain them life. All we have to do is make sure those don't die. And that should be game. If we draw a shock, that'll make things so much easier. Yeah, we can just ping him with Firebrand, and then the Phyrexian Arena will kill them next turn, so no attacks, and can't really see any way out of this. So even though we flooded out, our opponent didn't really do much, and we were able to be smart and take advantage of this History of Benalia, and Embercleave obviously put in some work for us as well. I think our opponent realized that they're dead and trying to figure out if there's any way out of it. Stuck on their combat phase. And if they attack, we'll just take it. Or we can block with the Firebrand and ping them for 1. Either way, it doesn't really matter. It's a bit of a rough start having Mulligan down to 5, but looks like we got there. So now up against Orzhov Vampires. See how we want to sideboard. Even their creature tribal heavy list seem like they always like to run board wipes, so I want to consider bringing in Gideon. I don't know if our opponent's salty, if they're really just trying to think about it. I mean, there's no reason to waste people's time, like just concede, you know, if you're not having a good time, if you know the game's over, just concede, you know. Don't sit there and just waste people's time, your time and the other person's time. Okay, let's have a response here. Nice and clean. Wow. 20 life to their 0. Okay. So obviously vampires like to gain life. I think the Raptor's a little mediocre. Tajic is kind of mediocre here. So I think that's where our cuts for the Ferocidon. Unbreakable Formation could be really good. Shock is okay, but it's not great. Justice Strike, even if their creatures, you know, getting buffs from Legion Lieutenants and things like that, can still take them out. Shock can hit an early Knight of Ebon Legion, but it's pretty mediocre, I think. Want a couple of Banishing Lights. Obviously the Shock would have won us the game there as well, so I don't know if we want to cut all of them out. Well, maybe just having... We just need as much selective removal as we can. If If they want to play board wipes, we can bring in Gideon on game 3. Maybe for Taranika, because Taranika gets a lot worse if she doesn't have other creatures to support her. And, well, they do have, could have like Twilight Prophet. I think I saw them playing that earlier. Of course, Embercleave maybe isn't as good. They have a ton of removal. So I think we want all these Banishing Lights, so if the creatures do get too big, we have a way to answer their lords and things like that, their vampire lords. Or if they have Sorin, things like that, maybe their own enchantment removal. So the Banishing Lights aren't really ideal, but we do have the Knight of Grace and the Ferocidon on curve, so I think we'll give it a try. It's not the best. And if we can keep drawing into creatures, we have the Unbreakable Formation, so we'll give it a try. Of course, Knight of Grace is a powerhouse against them, with the first strike, and then Hexproof and black. So depending on if their removal is more instant speed black removal spells, or if it's the enchantment removal based. Obviously, Knight of Grace isn't so good against that. My opponent maybe on connection issues or just distracted. 69 cards. That's cute. That's really cute. Sacred Foundry, just play tapped. Untapped, I should say. Or tapped, yeah. Not going to pay life. Looks like our opponent has disconnected. We are in ranked, so we're just gonna wait it out and see what happens. Hopefully they can come back on soon. We can start playing some Magic. I do love these sleeves though, these snow-covered lands, mountains, I believe. I love this Jace puppet, definitely my favorite one they've done so far. I think we go Taranika first. I think the rule of thumb I like to use in these situations when your opponent has a bunch of removal is, even though the Ferocidon is maybe the more relevant creature in the matchup, if you think your opponent has a lot of life gain, because obviously vampires can and do, even though they're not super heavy on the life gain strategy, we do want to try to shut that down. I think you just want to play out Taranika because you'd rather have the Ferocidon, and so you know your opponent, if they have removal, they're going to use it on Taranika first. And so if you value the Ferocidon more, then I think you just play out the Taranika, and then you can save your Ferocidon for after they've played their removal. That's generally how I like to do it. But that's, just in certain situations where your opponent has a ton of removal. Alright, and our opponent lost their connection. Alright, we did rank up a little bit. This is a reasonable deck, I think, to rank up. And yeah, I definitely put a lot of time into building this one and tweaking it and trying to update it for the current historic format. Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the deck. It is a very good deck. It is a very competitive deck. You can kind of tweak it a little bit here and there, but I think this list is probably pretty close to ideal. So yeah, let me guys know what you think, and look forward to seeing the next one. All right, take care.